We did have one question from the gentleman in the green top there. Can we get, I mean, you could.
Really picking up on your last learning about, thank you. Picking up on your last learning, you talked about data because the system is great, but if you put rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. Can you tell us a little bit more about that journey, asset data and the quality of that, the technician data and the quality of that, and how did you, what was the process, what was the journey, how did you get there in the end?
I can take that, yeah. So I guess to answer that, there's probably two pieces to it because we actually kind of split our implementation into two phases. So the first one was our maintenance phase, which was the pure field service piece. And then we did a project workflow afterwards as well, which is where we're looking at quotation and installation type jobs. So the maintenance piece was reasonably straightforward. We've obviously got our back-end system that drives everything. We built an integration to come across. So our asset information, work orders, those sorts of things were reasonably good. Probably the bit that was missing for us in particular was the skills for our technicians and the skills for the types of jobs that we wanted to do, because we'd never formalized that before. It was in our planners' heads, it was in our maintenance managers' heads that the technicians knew what they could and couldn't do, but we'd never mapped that out to say, well, what are the actual skills that define should you do that job, yes or no? So that was something we essentially just had to build from the ground up. It was sort of interviewed the maintenance managers on it a little bit to say, well, what do you think these skills should be? Draft something up and get their review. And then in each region, as we rolled out, that was sort of one of our pre-work steps before we had the technicians in for training, was to try and get all of that mapped out beforehand. And by no means was it perfect, obviously being brand new. So we've made a couple of tweaks and adjustments since then. One thing I wasn't expecting was that different regions would have different skills, even though all of the equipment's by and large the same. We won't get into that too much. Yeah, no, of course. I think, it's easy to assume it's all going to be perfect, but that's never the way it plays out. But so yeah, for maintenance, that was reasonably straightforward. It was more plugging a few gaps of things that we just haven't had to consider before. Where it started to get really messy was when we did the projects piece, and that was largely driven by the I'm not going to say inadequacy, I'm going to say the improper use of our legacy system. What was in the project management system versus what had physically happened out in the field were quite often two different things. So, you set some criteria to go, I'm going to move all my active projects, and then before you know it, there's half a dozen over here that the system says are complete, but we've only just got the purchase order from the customer, and the other way around. So that's had a few iterations, a lot of data going through a lot of spreadsheets to try and map from one system to the other. But by and large, that's mostly done now. And, it's a very transitional thing. Once you finish a project, it's kind of done. So as we go through further in time, that'll dwindle off more and more. And I'll sleep better at night. No, it wasn't that bad. It's just one particularly long weekend to get through it. But yeah, those were probably the main challenges, I reckon. And yeah, I think that kind of covers it.
We were talking about this just earlier today. I mean, two things that almost go without saying, but things that are in people's heads. So we've got a number of, we operate under a state thing, but our CES doesn't follow, our engineering teams don't follow the state borders. But state licensing do follow state borders, and how you've got to schedule then those particular aspects. And the system's now able to clearly help us do that a whole lot better, whereas before that was a lot more manual.
Yeah.
And I think one of the pieces, again, that we're still working through is the system's able to generate things to look at things efficiently, where you should go most times. But over a historical piece of time, you could be at a plant, you could be at a customer's location. So we talked about 20,000 pieces of materials. They're at about 7,000 customer locations, I think you were saying. Yeah. So you could be going there, and does it make sense? You've got to try and then bring some of the things into order. If it's a 10-minute away from where you are, you don't. But if it's 2 hours away, well, you want to be able to do something that might be out of sequence, which we never had any visibility to, which the system is now giving us visibility to. But you need to make some deliberate decisions about how you're then going to incorporate that as you try and get the most value out of the system. Because they were all on pieces of paper before, and everyone knew, if I go there once a month or once a quarter, I'll pick that up next time, or I don't have to, those sort of things. So I think the visibility of data to all of the people that are looking over the system is now far better. But you need to get there to be able to have all of that visibility.
Yeah, and to be fair, some of that stuff around, I think I'd mentioned the example earlier when we were chatting around, we had multiple pieces of equipment on the same customer site that came out in different months, had the same scheduling frequency and everything. They'd just been installed at different points over the years, and someone started the maintenance plan when it was installed, right? That's stuff that we probably could have cleaned up on its own, regardless of what field service system we were using. But the fact that it highlights now, because the technician goes, hey, I know there's 2 monitors here, but I've only got a work order for one of them. It's kind of forced us to look at that in a bit more detail, which is a good thing, because once you've got someone barking in your ear about it, it kind of tends to happen. So yeah, it's been good on that front. Obviously, a lot of work goes into cleaning that up, and we're still going to continue working through that. I think that's never going to go away, just because we have movements of equipment quite often. But yeah, it's bringing the importance of scheduling to the forefront, which we didn't have before. It was just kind of, yep, let it rip and she'll be right before. So yeah, it's nice to be looking at it in a bit more detail.
Questions?
The travel